Welcome to another week of the Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here today with Anthony Marchetta, my co host, my loyal man Friday, my uh, um, person I found on a deserted island in 1945 after I was land struck by a Japanese ship and provided the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe. Yeah, that Daniel Defoe story was all me. And today we're joining with
Every
JD.
word's true.
And today we're talking to JD Cowan, who has a wonderful project for us, Star Wanderers, which is an anthology of short stories by the man himself, uh, on sale on Kickstarter through Kursova Magazine, who is of course a big fan of a big friend of the show, and we're a big fan of him and his work. Um, JD, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. It's me, JD. I've been here before, I think.
You have, sir.
So, yeah, I'm here because I got a project going with Kursova right now on Kickstarter. It's Star Wanderers, and it's a collection of stories, both new and old.
Excellent.
Anything in particular you want to know about it? Because I can talk a lot about this.
I would love to hear you talk a lot about this. Why don't you guide us through it? I myself will spoil a little bit for you all. I have
Mhm.
signed up for the hardcover. Oh boy, and I think I got the soundtrack. I'm not sure about the soundtrack, but I certainly got the hardcover. Um
Yes. You were
and
also one of the original editors on one of the stories, if I'm not mistaken, which was
Judgment
Judgment
Sun.
Sun, which ran
Yes.
in Planetary Anthology Soul way back in 2020, in the first edition.
Yep.
I guess I should talk about that first. The fact that two of the stories in here were in the Planetary Anthologies and they're not anymore. The reason for that is because between the time they went out of print the first time and they were brought back into print, I'd already talked to Kursov about republishing them. So it didn't feel like it would be very fair to him to undercut him like that.
Sure.
So that's why they're in this one. Just,
I knew
just in
there was a
case
good
you,
reason for your betrayal. No, I'm kidding. Uh,
just in case like you buy them and like, wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be in here. Well, there's a reason why it's not.
yeah, yeah. It's all good. It's quite
Hmm.
frankly perfectly fine. The planetary anthologies were a super duper lot of fun,
Hmm.
but it's uh, uh, a warning to all good ambitious writers. Keep your projects small until you can really get into them.
Yeah, it was fun because one of the reasons actually I came up with some of the stories was because of the planetary anthologies originally, because as the original concept was, were stories based on planets.
Yep.
So one of the characters I had was actually one of the characters in this anthology. There's this anthology is about two different characters. One is like a space cop galactic enforcer named Ronan Renfield, and the other is a nameless knight, basically called the Agent. And the Agent was the one which I came up with with a sort of story cycle, I guess, that was centered around the four seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. All starring him and his, I guess, for lack of a better term, understanding of who he actually is. And
Mm-hmm.
two of them ended up in the Planetary Anthology series, which was the first one was in the Uranus collection, Cold Heart of Oranos, which is
Mm.
on a ice planet, obviously, and the other one was the Judgment Sun, which is in Sol, which
Yep.
was obviously the sun. And the other two were written later, and they weren't ever in the anthology, and they're not really based on any planet in particular. But yeah, that was the loose theme on those ones. And the other one was the Ronan Renfield stories. These ones are a bit. These ones are a bit different. I kind of thought these ones up because for whatever reason I came up with the idea of a space cop, but instead of like, you know, chasing down space pirates or anything, he's just ends up falling in between the spaces of eternity, for lack of a
Ooh.
better term. So, like, we have this is the far future, I should obviously mention, like the very distant future. We have planetary travel, obviously, interplanetary, all over the place. Humanity splits off, goes in all different directions, and obviously, this means that we don't all see each other again, I guess, for lack of a better term. If we're all going in different directions, we're all going in different directions. And when you're going intergalactic, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to see each other again. Ronan Renfield is a galactic enforcer, and his job is to look into cases that are not quite crime, not quite space crime or petty crime, or
Right.
even really, even really just basic terrorist stuff. All the stories in this one were based on, particularly the ones in this collection, because I've written other ones, but they're not in this one. The ones in this one were based on what kind of things in the future would happen if humanity, at least sections of it, completely went off the rails into their own heads. Dead Planet Drifter is the first story I actually had published in Kursova magazine, which was really cool. That one was kind of actually inspired by a Seal Moore story, which was Song in a Minor Key, which was a story about how Northwest Smith, it's just a small fragment, but in the middle of a firefight, he almost goes unconscious and he remembers his youth and he regains himself enough that he is able to get up and fight again. And that was the last story I think she ever wrote of Northwest Smith. But for me, I wanted to use that story as kind of a building block for the rest of the ones to come. Uh, in this one particularly, well, I don't want to spoil it, so I'll just say it's if you've read that story, you might have an idea what happens in this one. Then the other ones I did were like in Golden Echoes, which ran in Story Hack and way back 2021. Golden Echoes was based on a the title of a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem. I don't know if you know the one I'm talking about because I can't remember the title of it right now. But it's about someone splitting themselves into pieces to try to find the best parts of themselves in order to become, how do I describe this? In order to become more whole than a normal person. And if you know how something like that works, that's not how it works. So the opposite ends up happening. And the other two stories for Ronan Renfield are kind of the same thing. I tried to come up with stories that are very weird and out there and something that I think isn't going to be solved in the future because obviously we make the same mistakes a lot. We do the same. We would make the same. You know, sin is eternal. It's always going to be there as long as we're on Earth, as long as we're still alive. So there's always going to be new ways to do old things. I guess is what I mean to say. And by the end of the story, the last one in this collection is Slow Death on San Sebastian, which is about the two of them teaming up on one mission, and it goes pretty off the rails. There's a lot of craziness going on in that story. So what I did was originally all of these stories were originally meant to intertwine with each other. Um, this isn't exactly a fix-up novel like traditionally where you would just take a bunch of unrelated short stories and kind of put them together. I always imagined these ones as being related to each other and coming to a head at the end. So it's kind of like more of an episodic, I guess, novel than it is really a short story collection because it does lead up into the end. And
Sure.
that's the basic gist of this one. I went to Cursova with this one because I thought that, and so far it's been proven correct, that he would be able to give me some help in getting it out there and reaching a bunch more people than I could get on my own. And so far it seems to be working out pretty well, judging by how the campaign's going.
Oh yeah, you're about what 700 from your goal. That's pretty good.
Uh, yeah, we're about over 70% funded in less than a week, which is kind of a surprise to me, but it's a good surprise.
Oh yeah,
Which,
it's good. It's good. You know, you're a good writer, and you
mm,
also produce, which is quite frankly the big thing with a lot of this stuff.
mm,
Uh, you know, it's always free engagement to complain about Patrick Rothfuss or George R. R. Martin, but you know,
mm,
to actually produce something, that's something worth it. I do recall your Judgment Sun. I did
mm,
enjoy it. I remember it vaguely well. I thought it was a great deal of fun, even though the story I wrote before I bothered editing anyone else's work, because of the tortuous path through the stars that the planets took. I also wrote a story about a pyramid, except I wrote mine on an asteroid and it's inhabited by a evil horse god called Nightmare, which is not a
well,
pony
pyramids are
reference.
cool.
Oh, they are. They're everywhere, and I love it.
Yeah.
Uh, and you know, it was a great fun romp.
Mm,
Speaking from my own experiences with it, and of course, I'm expecting you know, similar uh, quality through the ones I didn't get to read at the time.
mm,
Um, let's see
yeah.
here. So, Dead Planet Drifter was published in Cursova. You
Yep.
have the two planetary ones, some
Mm,
from Story Hack, and then it looks
yep.
like one, two, three, four new stories.
Yep. About half of the collection is unpublished stories that I
Very
never put out.
nice.
Um. Oh yeah. Also, we should also probably mention the soundtrack. The
Ooh,
soundtrack add-on. This one, I don't really know what inspired me to go for this one, but because I'd speak with Jacob Kalta from 365 Infantry quite a bit, and he's a composer. He makes music himself, and I asked him. I said, "Do you think that making a soundtrack for this campaign would be a good idea? You think you could do anything interesting with that?" And he did. He came up with two different songs, one of which goes for uh, Ronan Renfield, and the other one's for the agent, which he composed them specifically for each character, which I thought was a pretty cool idea. I don't really know why I decided to do this, except that I thought, why not? It'd be cool to have music based on stories, especially from someone like him. He's put out some good music too. He's worked with Anvil magazine too. So it's that's an add-on too. So if you want some good songs, you can add on, and if you want to hear a preview of them, it's actually in the trailer at the top of the campaign page. Both songs are actually there's excerpts of them in the trailer.
nice. I like that integration.
Mm.
Mm.
Oops.
And
Okay.
I guess how are they? I guess they're just a bunch of MP3s, or are they more?
Yeah. He's what was I gonna say? Yeah, they're MP3 files, then they get sent out for the add-on. I'm not sure if they're sent out yet or not. Uh, Probably not till it's funded, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be sent out as soon as possible.
Mm, I get it. And yep. Hmm. Excuse me. So we have the ebook, paperback, hardcover. I do like the Kursova hardcovers, and the
Mm-hmm.
6x9 trade paperback, which
Yep.
is Kickstarter exclusive. Uh, let's see. I do like these Kickstarters. You get to see a little bit about what goes on. What's successful,
Mm,
what's full of interest for it. Because sometimes, like with what's another Kickstarter that's going on right now? I can't remember it, but Jaji's in it. It's like World
mm,
something, and it's like it's got like 50 authors in it, and
mm.
I recognize two names, and I just don't care about the rest. I like these focused
Yeah.
anthologies. Skylar Hernstrom has been very successful with his
Oh
um,
yes.
through DMR Books.
Yeah.
Uh, I've got a
Got his stuff.
oh
There's
yeah,
a I know about a few authors who are still trying to work out the kinks with their own Kickstarters because there's a lot of them floating around, and um, some of them just get thrown out there. As I know somebody who just recently threw one out there and put random things like ebook at like $20 and things like that, and they don't have any buyers. And like, of course you do. You
right,
really got to look into how to do it right.
yep. Or at the very least, copy the successful people.
Hmm.
It's like looking at this here. I don't I offhandedly I don't recall a single one of these things where the ebook is like more than $5. You know,
No,
like you
no.
just you just you just don't do it like that. Like maybe if you have a super dedicated fan base, or there's a special short story in it, maybe you could up it to 10. But I'm not
Mm,
feeling it.
yeah, you need a very specific goal in mind. The same thing with the funding goal, because some funding goals also are really absurd.
Oh yeah.
'Cause, I think a lot of them assume that or they want to hire like a cover artist. But if you don't have a cover when you're kickstarting, people don't know what they're backing for, so they don't even
Yep.
know what the art's going to be. So you kind of have to put a bit of thought into that part of it too.
And then it's like there's always kind of a risk where it's like, okay, so you said it would be like this, right? Yeah. So why isn't it like this? Well, the. And it's
Mm.
like, there's no really good explanation for it. It's just, yeah, it wasn't like that. That's it.
Yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah, Curse Cove has been doing Kickstarters for at this point since 2015, I think, was the first one. So almost a
Mm.
decade, actually. And I'm pretty sure all of his have funded, and they've all been very highly well received. So
Oh,
if you
yeah.
want someone to copy, he's someone to copy. He seems
That's
to know how
right.
to do it. That's also one of the reasons why I sought him out for this to help with this campaign because I knew he could do it better than I could. I did one myself and it did well, but I figured he
Hmm.
could do a little bit more, and he did. I'll appreciate it.
I seem to recall that was what we brought you in for an interview last time on this show.
Oh yeah, that was Gemini Man. Yeah, that was the
Yep.
that one ended up funding, and also I hit the stretch goals, so I wrote basically the equivalent of an extra book for that one. So it
Nice.
went from a trilogy to 4 books, which I'm not
Hmm.
complaining about. That's
No, no.
that's fun.
It's always fun to have a problem of success, suffering
Mhm.
from it. In fact, even.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but such sweet suffering.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so thinking about this, so we've got this project here. I don't recall you having any funding goals for extra stories or anything like that. Uh,
Hmm.
is that
For
right?
this campaign, the stories were already written and edited. This is it's the core 8 stories, so it's like I said, definitive beginning, definitive ending.
Yeah.
But we're thinking up some stretch goals right now, possibly. Still haven't quite decided on what to do yet. Um, I don't know. Maybe I'll see if I can hire Jacob to make a whole album or something of songs if we hit a stretch goal. That'd be
Sure.
pretty funny. It'd be
Yeah,
pretty cool.
that does sound pretty cool compared to, some of the other stuff.
Mm.
Like sometimes you get and it's just like a couple images that aren't like posters or anything like that. And it's like
Mm.
I'd like a poster. I've already got a million images on my computer from just reference material I keep obsessively. I could
Mm.
use an actual poster.
Yeah, I think that was what Iron Age magazine did with their goals. They had different posters and stuff like that. Seemed to work
Mm-hmm.
well for them. Uh, yeah, I just didn't really think about that sort of extra. I wanted to do something that added sort of to the mood of the piece. It's one of the reasons why the artist is Anton Oxenuk, which who has done other covers for Kursova.
Yeah.
I specifically requested him for this because his style, especially on Mongoose and Meerkat, really struck me as really interesting, and it kind of gets the vibe of the stories right.
Mm-hmm.
Because while like the campaign is basically says at the top epic sword and ray gun mystery thrillers, that's not really the genre of these stories because it's hard to really pin it down to what it is specifically. I mean, they're adventure stories, they're action stories for sure, but there's elements of sword and sorcery. There's Sword and Planet. There's
Mm.
Space Cop, obviously. There's cyberpunk. There's a lot of different stuff in there, and it's really difficult to really get it. And there's also a horror edge. It's very clear in the first story. So I wanted to get an artist that could really get that part of it out, and I think he got it really well.
Oh yeah, it's a
I
great cover.
can't imagine another artist really getting this one off, which is nice.
Oh yeah, and I didn't mean that you specifically needed a poster, tier
Hmm.
or whatever. I just meant in the sense of like it's just sometimes you get like non-physical media,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just like guess what? It goes into the pile with the other cat pictures and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, like free downloads and their pictures. Yeah,
Yep,
I've gotten those before. I never do anything with them, so
yep. I'm sure
that's why
it's
I didn't consider it with the last campaign either because I just
yeah.
figure, well, if I don't do anything with them, I figure a lot of people won't either. So
Oh yeah, I think that's yeah, that's the way to do it. Is all there is to it. It's fun, but it's not necessary at all. Um,
yeah,
so there's this project, and all the short stories are written already,
yep,
and
it's
the
all done.
novella and all that good stuff.
Hmm.
So then after this is funded, what's the next project?
Well, after this one, I'm already. This isn't the next one, but the sequel to this one basically is already about half done as it is. So that one will be coming more sooner than later, probably. But outside of that, I'm working on uh, a different series. It's I'm trying to figure out how to serialize it. I'm still weighing my options on that one, but it looks like it's going to be about 3 books long, probably, and it's probably going to be started this summer. So, 2, 3 months maybe. And I could have announced it by now, but I kind of want to wait for this project to be done and shipped out first. I don't want to undercut it.
Oh,
But
of
yeah,
course.
that's the next thing I'm working on right after this one. And I also have a few short stories I'm working on. One of them is actually coming out in where do I have it? Yeah. The next one, I have a short story coming in the fall issue of Kursova magazine, which is number
Ooh,
20, I think. It's called Mirage Carousel. That one is that one involves a lot of shooting.
ooh,
And there's another one I'm doing as well called What's It Like in There, which is going to be in Sidearm and Sorcery Volume 3,
ooh.
which I don't know when that one's coming out though, but
Yeah.
that's the next one. And in between those ones, I don't know of anything else. yet, in case somebody opens their submissions or something. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. That's what I have coming next.
It's a lot of good stuff. Sidearm and Sorcery. How long have they been going out? I've only become aware of them recently.
That's been made by Story Hack magazine. So they did Story Hack up until about 2020 and ran into financial issues because
Mm-hmm.
most people did in the sector at that point.
Yeah.
And he moved into making instead a yearly anthology called Sidearm and Sorcery. So they are is basically sword and sorcery stories, only they take place in the modern day. So Sidearm and Sorcery, which is, a lone protagonist ends up fighting the supernatural with natural means, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a Conan story, only I guess he's a bar brawler instead of a barbarian. That sort of thing.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I was in the first two volumes as well. The first one was a story called Living Land. That's about a rockabilly drummer gets dragged into a painting and the world is not alive, even though the title says Living Land, but it's not. It's the opposite. And the other one was
That's
City
pretty wild.
Eater.
What was
Yeah,
it?
volume two. The one came out. The one that came out in volume two was called City Eater, which
Okay.
is about a city that eats everything. That one was funny because that one I got a note back from Bryce, who's the editor, who basically said that's the best story I've ever written at the time. So that was nice to see. I really liked writing that one. That one is kind of how do I describe it? Timely in a way, but also it's also part siege story at a certain point. So it's an interesting one. I really enjoyed writing that one.
Yeah.
It's also related to the one coming out in volume three, which is What's It Like in There, which I intentionally named after the Edmund Hamilton story, What's It Like Out There. So it's kind of the opposite of that one.
I got it. That sounds like a lot of fun. Uh,
Hmm.
what was I thinking? I was thinking I got to get my hands on that Sidearm and Sorcery because that short story you mentioned does sound interesting. Uh,
Yeah, they're fun anthologies. I've if I wasn't in them, I'd still read them. I have I have physical copies of both of them here
yeah.
somewhere.
The um, excuse me. There was you also have some other stuff that's out there. We mentioned the Gemini um, stories already,
Yep.
and did you publish that one about the Y signal?
Oh yes, Y Signal. That one came out a little while back. That one was a different sort of project than the other ones I've done.
Mm.
That one came about because we were doing me, Brian Niemeyer, David V. Stewart, and a bunch of other people at the time were talking a lot about the 1990s and Generation Y and a lot of the stuff that was going on. And then we were looking into things like the thing we call cultural ground zero, whereas
Yep.
a lot of stuff ended up collapsing or taking shape at the same time. And then I started thinking about like what it was like back then, and a lot of that ended up forming into this story, which is not my usual type of tale, but it's one that
It's been
I'm still kind
stuck
of
with me.
surprised I wrote. It's still kind of surprised that one came out the way it did. And there's the weirdest part about that story was that it's not really a novel in the sense that it's not like chapter one, chapter two. There's how many were there? There's interstitials. There's an introduction. There's a conclusion, and there's three main stories that are sandwiched in there, which take place across the whole from 1995 to 1996,
Hmm.
and it ends with well, the end. I don't
Yes.
really want to talk about the ending of this story because it kind of ruins it if I talk too much about it. But it's an interesting story, and
It is. Yes.
it also ended up being kind of influential in kind of the stuff I did after that because City Eater is actually kind of related to it. Not in a big way, but it's a pretty obvious way. If you've read Y Signal, you probably know.
Mm-hmm.
You'll probably know by one of the characters' names, actually.
Ooh.
Uh,
I'll have to
and
remind myself and reread it. What a pity
yeah,
having to reread good literature. Oh.
yeah. And after that, there's another story I'm working on, which is also kind of related to it.
Mm.
And after that, yeah, also, I should probably just say most of the stuff I write actually is related to each other in some way. Because it's not like I destroy the universe in every story I write or anything. So most of my stories kind of take place in out of the way places in either the middle of nowhere or places people don't actually really notice. So because of that, they all tend to relate to each other in some way, whether they take place in today or in the future, or like in the case of the recent one I put out, which was Two Adventures Across Eternity, which was a collection of two novelettes I wrote. Um, One of them takes place in the far future, which is Duel on Dalpha, and the other one is Three Gifts of the White Wolf, which takes place in the past, in a sense, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the that story is difficult to describe because that one is more of a kind of a fairy tale in a way, but it's also well, it's kind of related to the other stuff I've talked about. I don't really know how to describe that one without saying it's kind of just a fable, but it's still related to a lot of the other stuff I write
Right.
because it's all well, actually, I think a lot of it is actually described in Y Signal when the characters talk about certain aspects of how the world works. So it kind of the other stories work like that. Is I guess I should put it. So they all relate together.
Mm. I mean, it's important to have themes in writing. People
Mm-hmm.
who don't know what they're talking about, you can tell, and it makes the book a lot less interesting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as an example, it's why I never really write military fiction. I've
Mm-hmm.
never been in the military, um, and I'm fine not starting anytime soon. Uh, but it's it's like a how do I want to put it? A moving slice of like the zeitgeist of our group for a bit because it's like we were talking about Generation Y for quite some time because we hit on something that was very important
Mm-hmm.
to us, and then now it's about making new things and making things like this collection of short stories,
Mm-hmm.
um, which sounds great, and I'm glad that you're not just sticking on one project but moving on and looking to the next things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's kind of a an issue with my generation, but also just kind of one in general is I want to make new things in the spirit of old instead of old things in the spirit of new, I guess is a way to put it.
yes,
Because that's a lot of modern stuff is also called skin suiting, so like skin suited versions of old things, but they're just new things. It's trying to trick you into liking the new thing because it looks like the old thing.
right.
And I don't like stuff like that.
It is unpleasant, and I certainly haven't really consumed any skin suit stuff in quite some time. Um, you know,
Hmm.
I think I might see that. What movie is that? Um, it's that one movie. It's the movie with H. John Benjamin in it, where he's this kid. He's the inner voice of this kid who's trying to avenge his parents for being murdered on a vicious game show.
All right.
And I
Yeah, I think I
can't.
remember that one.
Yeah, and it's like, all right, you know what? It's got uh, comedic tone, incredible violence, and it's not connected to any IP can think of. That sounds
Hmm.
vaguely interesting. That might be worth whatever the cheapest ticket I can find on it. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'll
Yeah,
just be lazy.
there's some new stuff I look into sometimes because like my podcast partner, because we do Canon Cruisers, which is
Mm.
usually focused on older movies we talk about. One of the ones we were looking at just recently came out as Late Night with the Devil, I think, and it's
Mm.
based on a 1970s sort of talk show where they had on some sort of a possessed girl, and it ends up going, crazy because that's what those sorts of movies do.
Right. Excuse me.
That's that sort of thing. And the thing about it, though, I don't know. I don't know if the movie's good or not. I would assume it is because some people are that I trust say it's pretty good. But one of the things that kind of soured me a bit on it is that they didn't really commit to the aesthetic of it. And I don't just mean like it's a widescreen movie in HD because obviously it's going to be a widescreen movie in HD. But it's like when you
Right.
do a found footage movie, you don't want it to just cut to like a dolly shot or something like that. And this is the sort of thing it kind of does. You know what I mean?
Right. It's found
That's
footage and it's like
yeah,
perfectly stable. Like they put it
yeah,
on a chicken head or something like that and it's just yeah.
yeah.
Repeat the title of the movie again, please.
Late Night with the Devil, I believe.
Okay, yeah, I've never heard of it, sadly.
Yeah, that like I said, that one the concept is interesting, and like I said, for all I know, it could be a good movie, but it just the fact that it just doesn't quite stick with the concept the whole way through kind of I don't know annoys me.
Right. I
But that's
know.
just me.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as modern movies go, well, this is something we've discussed on the show a lot, so I don't want to go too much into a rant type mode on it, right? And
Mm,
also, there's a lot of people covering the general decline of movies, so we're not really needed for that
mm,
specifically. But like, yeah, Critical Drinker, Mahler, and that team, but
mm,
which is a role to play, but yeah, we're not really needed for it. Uh, I think though, like I noticed last year, I believe I saw 4 movies in theaters. So one of them was like I saw Doctor Strange because it was my brother's birthday, and it was comically terrible.
mm,
The nicest thing that I could say about it is that it did have a sort of so bad it's good quality. Uh,
mm,
in terms of like it was bad in very over the top and creative ways, but it was bad.
mm,
Uh, but besides that, like I noticed, I go, okay, so wait, I went to see a Miyazaki movie, The Boy and the Heron. I went to see The Shift, which is Angel Studios. I went to see Sound of Freedom, which is Angel Studios. I went to see Godzilla Minus One, which
mm,
is Japanese, which is Toei, Japan. If you notice, of those 4 movies, none of them were Hollywood films, right?
yeah,
Literally none of them. Uh, I guess I don't know how you would count Angel Studios. I don't consider them Hollywood, although
mm,
they're starting to become bigger now because The Chosen
yeah,
catapulted them into stardom, and then Sound of Freedom took them to the next level. Uh, so they're starting to get there, kind of. But the fact is, they're producing films that are completely opposed to the Hollywood zeitgeist right now. This
mm,
is where I think there is a bit of a problem on the right of you pause here and you go, should we or should we not support something like Angel Studios?
mm,
And you'll get people like Owen Benjamin involved in debates like this, right? Now I know Owen Benjamin. I'm not stupid enough to go after him because he'll eat me alive. Uh right. However, I will say that I'm not wrong. Uh I'm not stupid enough to go after Owen Benjamin because he would eat me alive. There are certain things that are just off limits. Uh,
I mean,
Owen is one.
he called the Bard of Appalachia faking gay, and it destroyed him. Almost automatically, people were finding all the videos that guy did, where he had been like, "Yeah, I'm voting for Biden."
That's really funny.
I'm not
But
like anyway.
no, you're
Sorry,
right.
it was great.
You're completely right. But the point I was going to make is like I know that he has made comments about like Sound of Freedom, for example. He goes like Tim Ballard, don't trust him.
mm,
It's from the Mormon Church or whatever, right? Like,
mm,
don't trust Angel Studios because they're a big. indoctrination, which is true, right? Like, I don't trust them. I don't trust the Daily Wire either, for that matter, right? With that said, I think that we need to be able to look at, like, no, this thing that has been created is a net positive for the culture, right? Like, if they're playing the long game, then it's going to be a very long game, right?
Yeah.
Like, Daily Wire is sort of like that too. Daily Wire has things that they've done and people who I don't trust and don't support. And reflexively, even if there are people who haven't done anything outright that I dislike, at least, not a big thing, like Michael Knowles, for example, I don't trust the Daily Wire, right? With that said, I did watch Matt Walsh's What is a Woman, and I paid the $15 to watch it because you need a Daily Wire Plus subscription. So I paid it once and then I got rid of the subscription, but I watched What is a Woman, and I thought What is a Woman was a superb documentary. And also, it was an incredibly important documentary that actually did change the discussion around trans people. Like, you guys, I'm sure you all remember this, but before What is a Woman came out, it was not acceptable and very dangerous, like publicly, career wise, whatever, to question the narrative surrounding trans people. What is a Woman changed that, right? Like, it was an absolutely monumental culture shift. That was Matt Walsh. Whatever you think of the man, right?
No.
What's your point?
I think the fact that a bunch of liberal white women's daughters were being beaten out of sports continuously forced the issue.
No, I'm gonna push back on this. Actually, I think that What is a Woman absolutely mattered here. It changed the way that it changed the discussion. Now,
Yeah, but like maybe I'm
liberal
too
white
deep
women were
on.
being forced out already.
Yeah, but like maybe I'm too deep into like the esoteric Neon Genesis Evangelion posters to really get my head above water here. But um, you're the only one who mentions Matt Walsh's documentary. Like
I
there's
might be the only one that mentions Walsh's documentary directly, but first off, I follow a lot of I follow a lot of the media around this, right? And the
sure.
discussion absolutely changed. Uh,
Okay. You know
it
what?
also
I don't I
humiliated.
I don't watch the news. I don't do anything like that. I get most of my news from dreams and cryptic memes shared by
I get you. I don't
Indonesian
watch
people
it. I
people who
follow
are
it.
very confused about 1930s Germany. But
No, I get you. I don't watch it. I follow it, right?
yes,
Like to see what
yes.
people are saying about it. And there's a larger point here of even let's move aside. Like, we'll leave it as an open question how much it actually influenced, right? Moving that aside, it was a very good documentary on its own. If What is a Woman, like, if the Daily Wire is actually subversive, which it might be, right? Like, again, I don't trust them. I totally get the impulse of people not to, right? Uh, but if it is not, What is a Woman? There was no issue with it, right? I watched it. I could tell you this. I know there wasn't an issue with it, right? Uh, Sound of Freedom is another one. It's an interesting one. I dug into what people were saying about it, right? Like, I dug into both sides. I really looked into the arguments and things like that. What I could describe is that Sound of Freedom was definitely not entirely accurate, but its exaggerations were well within line of a fictionalized real story, right? With a made up ending. The final section of the movie, if you've ever seen it, is kind of dumb. Uh, like, they make up something completely different, but the fundamental facts of the film were not wrong, right? The media reaction to it was absolutely bizarre, which the Critical Drinker, by the way, correctly pointed out when he was talking about it. Uh, and this is one of those things where it's like, is Angel Studios actually a subversive Mormon group playing the long game? I mean, I don't trust them, right? I don't know that their goals are 100% pure. I don't think so. But the fact of the matter is that Sound of Freedom was highlighting a real problem. The Chosen, I think, is a very good show. I know that there's a traditional Catholic and traditional Protestant, depending on your pushback in certain areas, depending on who you talk to. I am not part of that. Having watched it and being able to separate the fact from the fiction, I think it is overall a good show, right? So I say all of this to say, like, what exactly, what do we mean when we go, we can't support these groups, right? When they're the ones who are doing things, and you go, oh, it's artificial, right? Like they're only being pushed because of because they're really like playing the long game and they're with the narrative, and there are other groups that aren't being pushed who might deserve it, but who aren't with Ben Shapiro or whatever. Right? Yeah, I get that. That's true. But the fact is that What is a Woman is not in line with the narrative, right? However you want to slice it. So I don't know. I just open this all up for discussion. I don't have answers.
Anthony, but it's the answers I want. No, I get you. From my perspective, and then we'll move to JD Cohen. There's no enemy to the right, um, and quite frankly, working with people to undercut the regime, the hegemony, the whatever you want to call it, the system. Um, I don't even want to call it the elites, quite frankly. Is good. Anything that undercuts power is good. Anything that increases our power is good. You know,
Mm.
which is like simple. There's this drunk person who comes to my bar, and she's she works for the campaigns for the powers that be, and I actually got her to joke with me. It's like, yeah, it's all BS, right? Oh, of course it's BS, Ben. And I go, it's all BS, therefore we should rule. So she's like, exactly, you get it. I'm like, that's right. What do you think, JD?
I think if somebody makes something based, for lack of a better term, then that's a good thing.
Yes.
As I think if you're doing something like ironically, as the name goes, I was pretending to be stupid on purpose,
Yeah.
well, you're still being stupid. So if you're trying to do something subversive to the other side, but you forget to, make fun of them. Like look
Yeah.
at Starship Troopers, like how
Right.
they tried to parody that and they didn't do it. They didn't do it right at all. Because not only did the parody not really and it didn't really parody the book properly, it also made everybody watch it just thinks, yeah, I agree. If these
Yep.
monster bugs came and killed people, they should die.
I'm from Buenos
There's
Aires. Yeah.
like them just saying, yeah, this is stupid because I said it's stupid is not good enough. You have to
Right.
actually give a case for why it's stupid, and they didn't do it. So they ended up losing that one. No matter how often they try to portray it, even now, and say that, well, actually, it meant this and that. It could have meant that, but that's not how it's portrayed now, and that's not how it's used now.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons why I think art is much better if it's genuine with what you're doing, because if it's not, it could be taken against you. And in that
So
case, that's what happened.
yeah, one of the rules of good parodies that I've talked about this a lot over the years, and it's always a very difficult conversation to have because, quite frankly, your reaction when you talk about a lot of this stuff is to just start laughing and go, "Okay, yeah, but it's very silly," which is true because it's a parody. But I try to have like somewhat serious discussions about it, and one of the signs of a good parody is if you took out the political elements of the story, how good of a movie or story, right? Movie is the example, but story, right?
Mm-hmm.
How good of a story would it be, right? Does it still work even if like if you decided to just tell this story? Does it still work? A really good example of this is the much beloved film, the parody of Star Trek, Galaxy Quest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Galaxy Quest is an excellent example of this. It's an excellent parody. And by the way, I do disagree that people are like, and Star Trek keeps gatekeeping it from being an official Star Trek film. It's not an official Star
No,
Trek film. It's not gatekeeping.
no.
Like, it's just not, but whatever. Uh, I always just found that argument funny of people who are like, those nerds at Star Trek. It's like, it's not, though, but whatever. Anyway, Galaxy Quest, though, is an excellent example of remove the critical elements and describe the plot of Galaxy Quest. And you have told a competent story, right? Like, and there are various examples of this that you could do. Like, one of the weird ones, which again makes it really hard to discuss, but it's actually like if you took the Phineas and Ferb Star Wars special, like Not even kidding about this. The Phineas and Ferb Star Wars special completely removed its context as a parody and just told the plot of the story, like, without any of those elements. You actually have a better Star Wars story than the movies that actually came out, like, pretty significantly. Where you put Phineas and where you put Phineas's love interest in the Han Solo role, and Phineas in kind of the Luke Skywalker role. His brother is brainwashed by a device that amplifies dark side energy, right? And they need to fight, him. Like,
Mhm.
all of they learn that their sister was raised from birth as a stormtrooper, and he's like, take these elements, remove the fact that it's Phineas and Ferb and that it's a parody, and actually look at them on their own, and you have a very compelling plot line here of
Mhm.
two young idealists of the MacGuffin that is a device that amplifies dark side energy that brainwashes one of them, right? Like, all of the sister who has realized that that the side that she's been raised to believe is the good side is actually evil. Uh, right? All of these things work in a way that's better than what the official Disney story did. And this is why these are considered in many ways beloved classics. The Princess Bride is another example, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think it's always really notable to me that the best scene in the Princess Bride consensus, right? The consensus most beloved scene in the Princess Bride isn't funny, right? When he goes,
Mhm.
"My name is Inigo Montoya. You have killed my father. Prepare to die," and he fights him.
Mhm.
Like, watch that scene. It's not funny. There's no joke in the scene. It's just really dramatic.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. And that's because even though it's parodying, technically speaking, it's parodying Rauritanian, I think it's called. Am I right? Rauritanian?
Earthanian, yeah.
Yeah, Rauritanian romance, like, is a parody of that genre. Absolutely. By the way, it's a parody of a genre that wasn't even that popular when the movie was made, which
True.
is even funnier. Uh, sure, it's absolute, and it is absolutely that, right? Like, there's no question it has political elements, but you can remove the political elements, and you still have an extremely good story. And we know this because at the moment when the story needed to lean on its dramatic potential, it was able to do so successfully, right?
Mhm.
So I think you're right. Like, there's something about this idea of I'm trying to think of the word sincerity, maybe,
Mhm.
right? That even in these parodies, there needs to be a core of sincerity, of love, right,
Mhm.
for it to really work.
Yeah, that's what I think of when I think of the Naked Gun. The Naked Gun is a parody of detective noir movies, but it's really funny on top of being a pretty good detective noir film. Even if they're making fun of it, you could clearly tell they love it just because of how it plays out. I mean, the good guy's still a good guy, the bad guy's still a bad guy. The good guy still wins in the end. It still holds up. I like that's why I say when I usually talk about how good a story is usually is there a point to it beyond just trying to get me to hate somebody or trying to get me to hate something or someone? And I think that's one of the worst parts of a lot of parodies now. Not even just parodies, but like it's kind of a dead meme now, but like the 2016 Ghostbusters movie was exactly that. The whole movie was just telling you how dumb Ghostbusters is and how stupid pretty much every character in the movie who isn't the main characters were. And that's one of the reasons why everybody hated that film, like except the people who apparently hate Ghostbusters.
Right, exactly. It's Yeah, like, these parodies are made, like Starship Troopers is a great example of. I have seen, so there is a small contingent of people who I have talked to who are like, Starship Troopers is actually a stealth genius movie, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but it tends to be a pretty small group, but I've seen
Mm-hmm.
people do it, even people on the right.
I've
The key,
probably done it, you know.
mm, right? It does happen. The thing about Starship Troopers, though, is that it's just not a good parody of Starship Troopers, whatever it is, because
It's
Mm-hmm.
not.
yeah,
It's
the
not.
director didn't read like he admitted that he didn't read Starship Troopers. Did not really care about Starship Troopers. He just didn't like what people were telling him the philosophy of Starship Troopers was.
Hmm.
Now, maybe you could argue that in the movie, the philosophy that he was arguing against was successfully skewered, and perhaps that is true.
Hmm.
I don't really know. But you really can't argue that it's a good parody of Starship Troopers because, quite simply, it's arguing against arguments that Starship Troopers never made.
Hmm.
Thing
Yeah.
it's arguing about things that the original book was just not about. Now, you contrast this with like one of my favorite. There's a whole subgenre of stories that are sort of like, yeah, I'm trying to think of how to put it. Of There's this whole subgenre of stories that are sort of like I call them there might even be a TV trope page with this name, decon recons, deconstruction reconstruction.
Hmm.
Galaxy Quest is in this category. I would say The Princess Bride probably is.
Hmm.
Uh, when you actually look at it, because it ultimately ends on a very uplifting note, but there's a lot of cynicism to get there as well. Uh, The Incredibles is one of the great examples of this, and one of my favorite movies, uh, where you tear down and destroy and make these common criticisms against these films, only to show people what they liked about it in the first place, right?
Hmm.
The Incredibles is a great example of this. It was a parody on two fronts. It was a parody of families, right? Making fun of families and interfamily drama, right? Drama
Hmm.
between siblings and things. And it was a parody of superhero stories. And it makes a lot of jokes at both of their expense, only for the story to go in the direction of showing us why we tell those stories, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is why I've seen people criticize the fact that The Incredibles ended with a big giant robot battle because, they're like, well, that wasn't the point. Well, no, it is the point. It's absolutely the point. It's one of 2 points because there are two
Hmm.
different points being made in the movie. They're making fun of families and they're making fun of superheroes. Now, if you want to try and show people why we love these things, and you need to have a scene where the superheroes come together and save the day, that's really, really awesome and well done, right?
Hmm.
And that's exactly what they do. And then you need to have a scene that shows the value of family uh above and beyond everything else in your life, which is exactly how they end the movie, right?
Hmm.
Everything is destroyed except the family, and because they're all unharmed, their reaction is laughter, right? Because that's the only thing that matters. Uh, so both of these things are necessary for that sort of story. So I think that these are why these movies are beloved, and why a movie like, say, Deadpool, is not going to have that sort of impact, right? I don't
Hmm.
hate Deadpool. I think some of the jokes work and some of the action is good. The fact is, though, that Deadpool is so mean and so cynical that it's hard. I don't think that people are going to latch onto it in like 20 years from now, and it'll be this beloved cultural touchstone,
Hmm.
like The Princess Bride became. Yeah.
It, it's like that one
Yeah.
meme where it's like, it's 1984. I'm getting tickets for Ghostbusters and Dune. It's 2020. I'm getting tickets for Ghostbusters and Dune. It's
Yeah.
2024. It and it's like, to me, it's almost you know unreasonable to even talk about them for some reason. It's like, no, it's the same thing. It's you guys are doing the same stuff, and it's like, what's more interesting to me is things that like indies are doing, like yourself, JD Cohen, of
Hmm.
course, with
Yeah.
your story. But
Yeah.
I did listen to the Cannon Crushers episode about Mad God,
Hmm.
and I thought you guys had some interesting takes on that. Do you? So I don't.
Hmm.
I wouldn't call it. It's in by no means a parody or anything like that. But now that it's been some time, what do you think about it? Have you had anything new to say about it?
Mad God, man. that was a watch.
That was a watch. It was.
It
It's a
was.
difficult movie.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons we picked it is because, like I said, we usually when we did our original run, it was mostly movies centered around the time movies were made between about the time Canon Films came in, so about let's say 1980 to about 1995. So we centered on our viewing experience on those types of movies. So you get to see a lot of things develop in the film world at that time. Stuff that didn't exist before then comes in, and some stuff that gets lost is lost along the way. And Mad God is kind of interesting to watch because it was kind of the other way around, where it was starting to be made about the time we more or less stopped watching the movies on our podcast, and it ended up being finished only like a couple of years ago. So what it did was made it interesting to think about from when exactly was this being made and for what purpose, because the movie itself is pretty clearly about cycles, endless cycles, about con- what's the word, consumption, that's it, endless consumption,
Mm-hmm.
emptiness, and filling it with, well,
More
wasn't weren't the
consumption.
with more consumption. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, because it's been a while since I saw it, I only saw it the one time, I believe that the guys that are sent down are also filled with gold and coins, if I'm not mistaken, instead of blood.
Yeah.
So they have that inside of them when they're organs. So he's basically send the Mad God, I guess that's a spoiler, is the main character of the movie, who sends down automatons who are made of gold to find something in the bowels, the abyss, but they keep dying and he has to keep sending down more. And by the end of the movie, it loops back around to basically state that this is going to go on and on and
Yep.
he's probably never going to understand what he's looking for.
Well,
Because it's an interesting movie. Yeah.
and even when they're kind of successful, you see that every time their their bomb, except for maybe the
Mm-hmm.
last guy's bomb, maybe not, uh,
Mm-hmm.
it fails at the last second. So it's not even
Mm-hmm.
that, it's like there's an interesting lack of purpose that kind of, yeah, you have to consider in their mission, and it's frustrating in a way that um,
Mm-hmm.
makes it memorable because it's like
Yeah.
these guys see such wonders, such horrors.
Yeah, that was the reason why we had a hard time rating the movie. Is
Yep.
not particularly because we didn't like it, because we actually did really like it. But it's also because usually when we watch one of the movies, we're in the middle of something else, and if we're distracted or tired, and you take something like that, and you just kind of get overwhelmed, and then like, okay, we have to talk about this now, and
Right.
that's gonna be pretty difficult to do. So yeah, but yeah, that's one of the ones where if we did it again, we probably would re-rate it higher just because we had more time to think about it. But the interesting thing about that movie is it didn't. If you didn't tell me it came out in 2020, I wouldn't have thought it came out in 2020 because there's nothing really about it that makes me think 2020 production.
Right.
It it feels very much like when it was began in production, which was the early 90s. It still has that kind of feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really any tropes in it, which is nice, but at the same time, there's nothing about it that makes it seem new. It just feels like a movie that was lost to time, I guess,
Right.
for lack of a better term.
It may
Yeah,
have
we
had
usually.
something more if it had been
Mm,
sooner.
yeah, I'm not exactly sure what would have changed specifically if it would have been put out earlier, or if he would have maybe he had an original vision that was different than the final version. I have no idea, but
Mm.
I'm glad it did come out because it was definitely worth the watch.
Oh
There's
yeah.
a there's a few movies like that that are being made. There's another one like this, but obviously not anywhere near this sort of material in it. called the Primevals, I guess it's pronounced, which is a movie that was made originally like back in like 1990. It was eventually going to use like the assistant for one of the guys who helped Harryhausen do his puppets.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that in the movie. They basically canceled the movie because they ran out of budget and the studio went under, I believe, and the director died. So it was off and on for years,
Yeah.
and then they just came out like last year. And I haven't seen it yet, but it'd probably be another really weird thing to see when you see movies like that are taken completely out of context.
There's a in that sort of vein. There's another movie that I'm trying to um, remember. It was what is that technique where they draw over the live actor? Um,
Oh yeah,
Rotoscoping.
that's it. Yeah.
rotoscoping. Uh, there was a movie that came out. Um, basically, it was a um, excuse me, a web original guy who like won a couple contests with a rotoscoped animation. Very good and interesting stuff. Um, but he recently finished a movie that's that may be up your alley, where it's about these flowers that grant magical powers and the people who use them to, for their own power and stuff like that. And I'm trying to
Hmm.
find the name of it. Um,
Hmm.
but TV Tropes is failing me.
There was actually one of those types of movies that came out a couple years ago, but it was nowhere near about like these types of things. It was just a silly action movie from the 80s called New York Ninja, where they just found the footage of all the movie. They didn't have any of the audio for it or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they ended up just taking the footage because they couldn't even find the guy who directed it. So they just took the footage, they made it into as coherent a movie as possible, and they tried to overdub it by looking at what the lips were saying. So you end up with this really strange film, but at the same time, because they were trying very seriously to get what the original intent was, it comes across as quite a watch. It's completely loony and out there, but it's a lot of fun. I hope there's
Right.
more movies like that out there because it's those are a treat to watch.
Oh yeah. Like when you actually get somebody who knows what they're doing and has some crazy ideas. Um,
Oh yeah.
it just does pretty good. Why
Hmm.
can I not find this thing? I could not get on the internet without seeing an ad for it. But now I can't even search list of rotoscoped works and it's on there. Uh,
It's weird.
yeah, it's always gonna be like that. I will search for it though.
While you're searching, I will look at comments. So Merg Macalremaxis has been commenting. Hello, Merg.
Exilium.
He says it's possible to not like or trust people because they're overtly untrustworthy while still praising their work, which is a net good. Looking forward to Pendragon. So that's a reference to the Daily Wire, who is producing the Pendragon cycle, which, by the way,
Hmm.
is one of my favorite series of all
Hmm.
time and very influential on my own writing by Stephen Lawhead. Uh, Stephen Lawhead, who, by the way, is one of the most underrated current writers. That it is like absolutely mind-boggling that people in our circles don't talk about him more. He
Hmm.
should be more. He should be bigger. But yeah, I get what you're saying. You're right. Like that we can enjoy their work while still not trusting them, and their work could be a net good. It's just a matter of like, so the. I guess my question is, let's say that you are convinced that the Daily Wire is going to be a net negative, right? Because you don't trust Ben, you don't like Ben
Hmm.
Shapiro, you don't trust Andrew Klavan, whatever, right? Uh, they produce something that is obviously not in lockstep with the culture, very anti. current culture, like What is a Woman, as an example. Lady Ballers is another example. The problem is that Lady Ballers isn't very good. Uh, so it was never really going to be that helpful. And Ben Shapiro released another like horrible school shooting movie called like Run Hide Fight. That was mocked for to here and back. And there's no excuses for this because again, Angel Studios is also creating countercultural stuff that's actually good, and even Matt Walsh is creating countercultural stuff that's actually good. So I blame Betty Boy for it. But uh, yeah, I guess my point is, if you think that they're going to be like a net negative on society, we say don't give money to people who hate you. Does the Daily Wire hate you? They did just go out and say that Clavin and Shapiro are like went off against the phrase "Christ is King" for some weird reason
That was
after
dumb.
firing Candace Owens, who, don't get me wrong, I don't really trust Candace either entirely, although I do trust her more than some of them, right? But the whole Christ is King debacle was a complete mess.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very it's difficult to me, right? Like,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's like, and yeah, I can't pretend that the establishment secretly wanted What is a Woman. No, they didn't. Right? They absolutely did not. Uh, Continuing, out of topic. Is there any potential crossover between Superversive and Hope Punk? I told him that I have never heard of Hope Punk before. I googled it, and I am suspicious that it's steeped in radical leftist social change. The idea is that it's this genre that's like the opposite of grimdark, and it's about people who are like going to try and make a positive difference in the world, and whatever, but the way that some of the words used made me go, huh. Especially because grimdark actually does tend to lean somewhat conservative due to like the Warhammer community. Yeah. Uh, I know, I know, but it's true. I'm not wrong. Uh, yeah. So I'm suspicious, but I could be convinced. Like maybe I'll look into it more and it's fine. But from the little bit that I read, I'm a little suspicious of it.
Well, it's
Uh,
like solar punk. Like solar punk sounds great, right? Like not having industrial hellscapes and hive worlds and all this jazz. But then it's like, what is it trying to sell? It's not trying to sell, you know, the hardworking farmer. It's selling the communal living. It takes a village.
yeah.
So it's
So
like,
I'm a little suspicious.
yeah, and
I don't know enough about it to say for sure that's a problem, but like some of the buzzwords make me go, huh.
there's a part of the reason why like Superversive sticks around is because you know we stick around. Most of the stuff that gets built up isn't really from authors and isn't really from natural movements within the art sphere, if that makes sense. It's like
Oh
a
yeah.
Tumblr post given power.
Yeah, there's also I think people give up on a lot of this stuff way too quickly.
Mm.
Like I've even heard people go like, "Oh, the pulp revolution was ultimately a failure. We're like 10 years on or whatever." And then I go, "How is it a failure? We're still around." Like you can't really say that it failed when it's ongoing and go, "Oh, it's been 10 years." 10 years. 10 years is nothing. Like it's really not that long. The Superversive, again, the seminal Superversive essay was created in 2013, was written in 2013. It didn't blossom into a movement until a few years after that. Now you could go like, oh, the Superversive movement was a failure. The site shut down, but we're still here, right? Like
Yep.
it's not a failure. We're still around. Like it's not over yet. You really can't judge it on. There's also the fact of what constitutes success and what constitutes a failure. I don't think that we're going to radically overturn the entire industry. That's not possible. We don't have enough people. Do I think that we will carve out a sphere? I think that is possible, right? Like carving out a sphere in the industry for people to flock to and then maybe influencing future generations, like there's no reason that that can't be something that happens and that's ultimately the goal, I think, right?
It's
Like
it's yeah, and it's like the future belongs to the people who showed up. You know,
That too.
that's the reason why whenever a friend, says, "Hey, I've got a Kickstarter," I invite them on. I especially try to support guys like Kursova, people who actually work and produce. What we're doing isn't, you know, kicking in Tor's teeth or whatever. Quite frankly, that's impossible. They're owned by Chinese billionaires. They have
Hmm.
every market.
Mm-hmm.
They're backed by Macmillan. They are directly owned by Macmillan, excuse me, but the down the chain there's like infinite money. Point is what I'm trying to say. By people who simply do not understand literature and do not care. It's the goal is excellence, and uh, there's a reason why I like having all the Kursova guys on here as often as possible, is because they're all quality. I've yet to
Yeah,
read
that's
anything
true.
bad from J.D. Cowan, and I certainly haven't read anything bad from the editorial pen of Kursova. Other groups like DMR Books, they've got absolute titans like Skylar Hernstrom, and of course, we have the excellent Nick Cole doing his own thing with Galaxy's Edge. Um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing isn't the glamorous showing up in a convention center and doing whatever. When I had an opportunity to go to Dragon Con, I spent some time harassing tour people. It was great. I kicked it in, and I'm like, hey, how's the winning all those awards feel? Excuse me?
Hmm.
What do you mean all those awards? Oh, don't you guys just give yourselves awards now? Is this what's going on? No, And then I'm like, oh, and I walked off. Uh, it was great. And then I sat next to Kat Rambo, selling books. She sold no books, and I sold all of the books, all the superversive books I had at hand. It was great.
That's
Um,
incredible.
no, I shouldn't be too unfair to her. She sold like one, but like one a day. But it's like I was actually hawking them. Like victory goes to those with energy. She was put
Mm-hmm.
in her position because of forumites. We're actually producing and doing the work.
Yeah. The other thing too is like this. Talking about 10 years ago, you also should probably remember what the landscape was 10 years ago for independent stuff. It
Yes.
wasn't like this. You didn't
Yes.
have this much stuff coming out all the time. I was like, back then, I was still trying to even find. That was before I even read Jeff Rowe's series on Appendix N. There
Mm.
was really not a whole lot out there at the time. It was mostly just like there was the sad puppies, mostly just
Yeah,
people who did not like what was going on, and that's pretty much it.
Yep.
There's just that
in
group.
a just world, Jeff Rowe will go down as one of the most influential figures in the modern sci-fi scene for both the movement he ignited and the people he gathered around him. Right, like
Mm.
he was an incredibly important figure in all of these modern movements.
Hmm.
Uh, I have had disagreements, but have nothing but tremendous respect for Jeff Rowe and the work he's done, the influence he's had, which has been overwhelmingly positive in every sense of the word.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, and just other stuff from Merg. I just want to mention. He says most comedy made by mainstream outfits now is mean spirited or nihilistic. Been that way since at least 2015 or 2017. That
Hmm.
actually seems too late to me, to be honest.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was a lot longer than that.
yeah, I want to say since like the late 90s, and I know that
Mhm.
the year is nine. What's the year of the 90s collapse generally dated at? 97, 98.
Yeah, around 97, 98 is when a lot of the stuff really started taking a turn for the worse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say that it's been like that since then. Like honestly, the last great
Go
comedy
on,
that
JD.
Hmm.
I can really remember coming out like that was just purely a comedy and was actually great is like Liar Liar in the 90s.
Yeah, that's not too out of it's not too out of it. Like I said, one of the things too to remember about is what it was like 10 years ago is also in response to what it's like now. The movements that are having effect now, or even having influence now, like even groups like Iron Age, who specifically fashion themselves on not being what the mainstream is. And the problem is, like, if your movement is just more of what the mainstream does, what's the point of doing it? There's
Oh
That's
yeah.
true too.
there's the that what was it called? The New Edge magazine. There was a thing with them a little while ago where that was a term invented by Howard Andrew Jones to talk about the new sword and sorcery that was going on. And then this magazine came around calling itself New Edge Magazine, but it wasn't run by him or had any influence by him. And it was just made by people who were just writing stories that everybody else was writing stories about. It is just at that point, what's new about it? It's the same thing as everything else. And I think a lot of people realize that, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of the new people I come across now, especially online, when they're whether they're writers or comic artists or even video game guys, they're not looking towards the mainstream at all. A lot of them don't even seem to really know much about what the mainstream is doing anymore. I've talked to writers
Mhm.
who haven't even read a mainstream book from a big publisher in like almost 2 decades, if even that, and
Oh
yet they're
yeah,
doing well.
I'm one of those people. Like
Oh yeah.
the last novel that I read from what could be considered any sort of like big mainstream publisher. I mean, would you count The Eighth Arrow by Father Weta? Probably
No.
not. It's from a Catholic press, Ignatius
Mm,
Press. Granted, Ignatius Press is fairly big. Like it's an influential, known commodity, but it is
mm.
still a Catholic, like
It's
distinctive
not one of the
press.
big four or big three super
Yeah,
big
that's true.
Mm.
nopes.
Like once you take, if you don't count that, I honestly like I can't think of anything. Right? Like what translations of the Iliad and the Divine Comedy? Yeah, w-
Oh boy. When
yeah.
they were doing those modern translations where they're basically like making them into like 3 IQ translations.
No, 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 no.
That's
Let me tell you about
I'm very
Odysseus,
selective.
a
Yeah,
complicated man. Excuse me.
Emily Wilson. Uh, I have to say this now that we've brought this up, and one of the most insane articles I ever read was a feminist article from some sort of feminist rag magazine, doesn't matter which, commenting on Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey, which is of course the feminist translation of the Odyssey, right? Not
hmm
that she would admit that outright, because you can't, you know, when you're a translator, you can't admit that this is the feminist translation because that would be admitting that you translated with a bias. So she implies it, and then everybody else fills in the blanks, right? Uh,
hmm
so you read this article, and it started off with like her talking about, aren't you, you know, you got to feel a little sorry for Penelope, and you got to be a little jealous of Odysseus because he gets to travel and everything, and poor Penelope's stuck at home. And I'm like, man, just Jeff Foxworthy voice. You might be a feminist if you read the Odyssey and you go, man, I wish I was Odysseus. Like, one of the most unlucky characters in the history of literature. Uh, like, how can you possibly be in such a jealous, wretched mind state that solely because Odysseus is a man, you read it and you go, man, I wish my life was like that guy's. Like, it just blew my mind.
I wish my
Like,
dog died the second it smelled me, so I never got a full reunification, even though it held on for so long.
one of the
Man.
saddest scenes in all of world literature.
It is.
Uh, and it's beautiful. I consider it a happy ending. His dog got what he wanted. You know, he waited for Odysseus to come back, and he died a happy dog. Uh, the optimistic interpretation. Uh, no, it's a that was like I'm going. Can you imagine? If for the record, my preferred translation is Stanley Lombardo, who translates with much energy, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, we're going to be talking next week, and believe me, I am very much looking forward to this. Since I have been exploring the publishing field recently, and we are going to be talking about what a state the field is in right now. So the main problem that I see is not that there isn't quality stuff out there, because there is, right? I know a lot of it, you know. I can point
Mhm.
people to it. The problem that I see is that because readers have so thoroughly lost trust in the publishing industry, it is now almost impossible to find it on your own, right?
Mhm.
The market has splintered in a really bad way, so that you have people who have like these tiny markets, like pockets of people. It's very difficult to get any sort of large following. You could argue that it was always like this, which is sort of true, but at the very least, you had like, I like books by this editor. Ballantine Books is a good example, right? The Ballantine Books line, which is often touted as like, even Jeffro, I think, was talking about this. It like saved fantasy, right, in the 20th century in a very significant way. Like, it was a very important line of books. I could read something from Ballantine Books and know, with the exception maybe of the Gormenghast trilogy, which is somehow in that line, but with the
Mhm.
exception of Gormenghast,
Gormenghast 1 and 2 is fun. Well, so the best way to read Gormenghast is not how people like. I've never read one authorial word about his intention behind Gormenghast, but I will defend Gormenghast.
I'd like to see you argue this with John. I haven't read it. I'm just going by what people have
He and
told
I
me.
can argue
Uh,
with each other, and you know it. Because I am too unserious to get into a conversation with him at that level. Because I will bring out the memes. One of my earliest recording projects was a one-man recording of Gormenghast. If Tindek's still up, it's still out there.
Oh.
yeah, you get what I mean. Point is, the Ballantine books are one of the most influential lines, right? Like, we
Oh
don't
yeah,
have
definitely.
that. So you have people like you who's making money on Kickstarter, which is pretty good, right? Like,
Mhm.
honestly, the fact that you have made as much as you have on Kickstarter already is like incredibly impressive,
Oh, it's
and
great.
this probably puts you well within the top 1% of creators in terms of success.
Very
Uh,
lucky for sure. Yeah.
yeah,
There are
but
many feminists who wish they could be you. Just
yeah,
so you know, yet more
it's true.
envy.
But no, the reason that I say this though is kind of to illustrate what a bad spot the industry is in, because
Mhm.
like you're within the top 1% of most successful. Now,
Mhm.
you
That's
are
not a
not.
good thing.
Yeah, that is.
That's not a good thing.
I don't mean to be rude about it,
No, it's true though.
because you're more successful than me, right? Like, this is to be clear here. But
Mhm.
yeah, this is a problem with the industry. And we were discussing this where, like, I sort of realized that so many of the majority of the markets, you can't trust them. They're bad,
Nope.
right?
Mhm.
Like, they're
Yep.
not putting out good work. Uh,
Mhm.
and they are also like, this is something we will discuss next week, so I'm only going to mention it, then move on. They're also like incredibly bigoted. Like, the field is so unbelievably close-minded and bigoted, but when I say this, I mean it in a very real and substantial, quantifiable way, right? Like, in a way where you could plug the numbers and prove it, right? Uh,
Mhm.
Not in a way that is, ephemeral, like, white privilege or whatever, right? I mean
Mhm.
that they are openly saying, we favor this work, we don't favor this work, right?
Mhm.
Like, because of your identity and not because of the quality of your work in any way, shape, or form,
White
Oh
right?
men
yeah.
need not apply.
Yeah, no,
Well,
like, pretty much.
Yes. What were you saying,
oh, that
JD?
that was definitely true because was thinking of an event that happened. It was years ago at this point, and I don't think they're still around anymore. But there was a magazine publisher who randomly went on Twitter and just basically said, "You know, we wish we could have more women submit to us, and this, that, and the other." And it was out of nowhere. It was unprompted, and like a bunch of people responded, including a woman writer I knew. Just,
I remember this.
I don't want, I don't want this. I'm not going to submit to you for this. It's just because it comes across as so stupid. It's
Like,
insipid. It's just so
Yep.
the
dumb.
thing about this, though, is I don't think that people realize who aren't in the field like us how ubiquitous this attitude is. This
Yeah.
wasn't just the one publisher,
No, it's
right?
that's a common thing.
It
It's
is
very common.
probably close to the industry standard, right? That
Oh yeah.
they prefer, they really don't want straight white men submitting like, I don't know how else to put this. Like, I'm not making it up. They say this themselves. You
Yep.
know, like, I could quote them if you'd like me to. This isn't a
You will next
conspiracy
week,
theory,
Anthony. You will next week.
and we will. Yeah, and we
Mm-hmm.
will. They don't want straight white men submitting stories. They don't want straight white men publishing stories. They
Mm-hmm.
don't want you publishing, which is just bizarre because it's lowered the overall quality of work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
also made it really hard for readers to trust where work is coming from. We have this burgeoning indie scene, but I think ultimately there is a role for, like, we need to be able to trust our editors. You know, we need to be able to trust that, like, hey, this person says this is good, right? Like the Ballantine Books line, right? We need to be able to trust that this group, these people say this is good, so it's worth considering. And that's just not the case. You're looking
Yeah.
at indie stuff, and with indie stuff, you're rolling the dice. Indie stuff has just about equal amount of odds to be unreadable dreck as stealthily brilliant. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
now
True.
when you have in the
Hold on,
modern
Anthony.
day,
JD, do you have
go ahead.
anything to comment on that?
Uh, Not really. It's just that, like, obviously I've been doing this for a long time, and I know that there's plenty of examples in the mainstream where this happens. I mean, that's pretty much what happened to Nick Cole, if I remember correctly. His
Mm-hmm.
own editor threw him under the bus. But the thing is, that's not just the mainstream publishers. They're people. The same people are in the independents. They they're not any different. It's one
Yep.
of the reasons, like I said, if you're going to publish independent or new pub, it has to be something they're not already doing because that's the point.
Yeah.
So that's why I tend to think of is I'm not really sure what the game for a lot of these people are except for clout from their friends because they're not selling stories. People aren't buying any of this stuff. So there's no other reason to do it.
The other thing
There's no
too,
gain.
yeah, growing up like with this just being the industry, I have to admit that there is. I'm trying to think of how to put it exactly. There is something to this idea of, like, I just want to be published, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
with that said, I've set a hard, like, as I'm looking at it, I personally set a hard rule. I will not publish anywhere that does not accept simultaneous submissions. The idea that you could just tell someone, you're not allowed to consider other markets until we officially reject you is completely absurd. Like, if you want to hold my story, then pay me, right? Like, it's that simple. So I won't consider markets that won't have simultaneous submissions. I won't consider non-paying markets, and there are more of them than you realize, right?
Hmm.
Oh yeah.
Like, if you're a market
Yeah.
that is non-paying, I will not consider you. And I won't consider markets that make people pay to submit. And again, there are more of them than you realize. This is grossly anti writer. It's grossly anti
Hmm.
industry, right? It's anti reader as well, right?
Hmm.
Like, that's completely absurd. That's not how this works. The way this works is that you pay me or you reject my story, right? Uh,
Hmm.
so I'm in it. On one hand, I want to get published. I want to get paid for my work. I will accept like $10 for a story, for example, if that's what you can offer, because that's just the reality of it, right? Like,
Hmm.
that's what it is. However, ultimately, I'm in this to say that, like, I do want validation. There's a point to that, and I think that there is something too that's the purpose of the industry. Like, I don't want to
Hmm.
entirely put it on like only SJWs are in it for the validation.
Hmm.
No, that's really not true, right? Like, we all want
Hmm.
to be validated. We all want people to say, I enjoyed your work enough that I will give you actual money for it, right? That's
Hmm.
not an SJW thing. uh the problem becomes that people are doing it only for that,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Hmm.
I think though that we do need the right wing and like the good guys for in a sense, also out there going, yes, I will recognize your story, and to prove that your story is worthy of recognition, you will get actual compensation for it, right?
Hmm.
Because you putting my story free on your website is worth the paper it's printed on. You know, It's not worth anything. It's
Hmm.
free. Like literally, it's just some guy said they liked my story. Okay, fine. How much do you like it? Right? Uh, I don't know. This is just overall general thoughts, and we'll go into this in more detail next week, and I will try and codify it a little bit more. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that separating it out as like, oh, SJWs just do it for the validation. It's like, well, no, everybody does it for the validation,
Hmm.
right? We
Mm,
all have an ego about it, at least to a limited extent.
Yeah.
Even if that ego isn't the primary driving force, the fact of the matter is we could just publish it all ourselves if we really didn't care, but we do.
Hmm.
yeah. Let's JD, we are
Hmm.
at eight, nearly at 8 o'clock. Um,
Okay.
how about you give us some final words, and then I'll lead us
Yeah.
out.
Okay. Yeah. I'll just say like in when it comes to writing, and it just be writing in general. And part of the problem I have with a lot of the sort of way the industry works, especially with all these weird cliques of people who just want to fit in. It's not so much for me anyway about validation as what is the purpose of what you're trying to do? What
Mm,
is your end goal? What does your story exist to do? And a lot of these sorts of modern stories don't really have any sort of point except to just say, I'm part of the in group. You should publish me because I'm part of the in group. That's it. And there's something to that when what the in group is doing is, culturally good. But when it's nonsense and it's chasing readers away and it's shrinking the market, I don't see the point to it. And that's one of the reasons why I've been independent like this for so long and why I went to someone like Kursova to help me with my campaign is because I have a story that I think has a purpose to it, and I think he believes in that as well in this campaign. So check it out.
absolutely. Do check it out. I'm gonna put one more link in the chat for us. Like I've said on the stream before, we support authors who produce, who make good stuff. Kursova, J.D. Cowan, Brian Niemeyer, all these other guys that we've mentioned here, in favorable terms, produce great stuff. Please support them. Let's push J.D. Cowan over the edge. This stream is purposed to curate the good things that you can read and support, and the good authors that you can support as well. JD Cohen, I want to thank you for coming on and talking with us. I wish you all the best. Hopefully, next time my Streamlabs will not just wipe itself for no good reason, and we'll start on time to give you all the appropriate time. Um, and we'll be happy to have you on to support your next project, which will certainly be worth while as long as you keep to the great standards that you've been advocating here. Thank you, sir. And we're no longer live.